I'm going to start the audio. Yeah.
Good morning, Dr. Gorin. The reason I'm saying a special good morning to Dr. Gorin is that he hired me 41 years ago to work for Iowa State University.
Oh my goodness. That was a long while ago, a little bit ago. You were just a young thing, fresh out of high school.
Oh yeah, right. I've been around a long time.
Yeah. I don't know if Don heard that. Mr. Goring, did you hear Barbara? He might not even have his, he's thinking he might not have his computer turned up.
Barbara, I think I still think I have the award for the messiest office.
Come on, dog, don't do me that way. Well, I've been working this morning. Part of this is I've been at work. I'm at work. That is too funny, Dr. Bennett. That is too funny. And I truly can find things. I really can.
I can too.
I don't know why these people have to be so neat. Really?
Like Maynard over here. I see either Maynard has his computer shifted up so you can't see the mess on his desk, or he's cleaned it all off or something.
That's intentional. It is a mess.
They say
and how many offices do you have, Maynard?
2.
Yeah.
And they're both a mess.
Well, they say the people with the messiest desks are the ones that get things done. So there you go.
Has our speaker joined us yet?
I have not seen him come on. Mason was trying.
Yeah.
Yeah, the speaker's on.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
You got him? Okay.
Yes.
Da-da-da. Well,
Must be
I'm
on
going to give
page
it
2.
20.
There's Ryan. Hi, Ryan.
We'll start.
Welcome. All right. Here we
We'll
go.
start in about 10 seconds.
All right.
All right, Karen, if you would put up the flag, and those of us that are able to stand will do so and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America Thank you. Not aware of any Rotarians in need of a special recognition or hold, or last hurricane there with Ian and also in Puerto Rico. So take a moment for that. All righty, thank you. You know, the other one that just occurred to me is Ukraine. It just never seems to end, and we'll have to maybe help those individuals as well in our thoughts and prayers. Next week, we have Mr. Culhane who will be with us from the chamber, and that will be online. So again, we'll be on same. And I'm not aware. You are welcome.
Okay, if you're ready, here we go to everyone. Join in if you like. Welcome to you from Ames Rotary, Nevada, London, or gay Paris, from far off lands or the USA. We're glad that you are here today. Come back again whenever you're near. Join us and then we'll make it clear. Around the world you will always be welcome at Rotary.
Sorry about that. Did everybody's screen go blank, or was that just was I unique?
I think it was your I think it's your connection, Kent.
That's typical. I'm not very well connected, people, so I'll apologize. Today, October 10th, this day in history, 1845, the U.S. Naval Academy opens in Annapolis. And in 1935, George Gershwin's opera, Porgy and Bess, opened on Broadway. And usually I don't do this, but also this week in 1984, American became the first woman to walk in space. And of note, 1975, the TV sketch comedy and variety show Saturday Night Live premiered on NBC. And it's still on the air, which is pretty amazing. So some of the things that happen in history today. Today's known, of course, as Columbus Day and as Native American Day. For those Rotarians, all of us, today's National Angel Food Cake Day. So I want to make sure that you all participate in a special dessert this afternoon or this evening. And with that, Mason, I'm pretty much through. Any other announcements I'm not aware of? I'm over to you, sir.
Can you hear me okay?
Well,
okay, I'm getting a thumbs up. So, all right. Well, it's my pleasure to welcome our guest speaker today, Mr. Ryan Haar, who is the Special Projects Wildlife Biologist with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. Ryan graduated from Iowa State University, so former Cyclone, with a degree in wildlife and animal ecology in 2000, and began his career with the Iowa DNR as a private land specialist at Big Marsh Wildlife Management Unit in Northeast Iowa shortly thereafter. He then returned to Iowa State for graduate studies, finishing his master's in 2005 and joining Iowa State's Department of Natural Resource Ecology and Management as an assistant scientist in 2006, where he managed a large series of prescribed fire and grazing research projects for a multidisciplinary team of investigators at several universities across the Midwest and Great Plains. After 7 years with Iowa State, Ryan took an opportunity to return to the Iowa DNR's Wildlife Bureau as a regional private lands wildlife biologist working with the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, working primarily with wetland restoration projects and managing the DNR's IHAP program across 25 counties. In 2017, he became the Wildlife Bureau's Special Projects Coordinator, where he leads large-scale wetland restoration projects coordinates the agency's conservation grazing efforts across the state, and handles nearly all aspects of DNR's fire management relationship with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and other federal agencies. Ryan maintains qualifications as an RXB2 or Federal Type 2 Burn Boss, an engine captain / incident commander with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and typically deploys once per year around the country on national fire assignments, as well as leading several thousand acres of prescribed fire in the Midwest each spring. Ryan lives in rural Hampton, Iowa, with his wife, Catherine, and 3 active sons, just like me, Scott, Brady, and Colin, who take up nearly all of his available free time, such that it is. Please welcome Ryan. Go ahead, Ryan.
Hey, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me here?
Yes.
The connection good? Awesome. So thank you for the invitation, Mason. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to talk to you folks. I have a split screen, so I'm hoping I can share my screen and my PowerPoint will show up. I am going to, let's see, I go here. 1 second. Share. Okay. All right.
You can see a
My
PowerPoint.
Does it show up there, Mason?
Yep.
Good. Hopefully it shows up in the presentation mode. Is it that or is it in the screen view?
I think it's kind of in your screen view, not the presenter mode.
Well, we may just have to go with screen view here. I'm not super great with Zoom. The state of Iowa actually uses Google.
That's okay.
Let me just try one thing here really quick again. Now, let's see. Screen share. Let's try this. How's that look, Mason?
There you go. Perfect.
Got it? There we go. Perfect. Okay. Well, good. So I would be remiss to do this talk without noting Dr. Tom Eisenhart at Iowa State, a great colleague and a good friend in NREM there at Iowa State, because he helps us coordinate a lot of what we do. And Mason invited me here, I believe, to talk about the article that showed up last spring in the Visions magazine, the alumni magazine, right? Where they did a really nice feature and several different articles about all the different Iowa State alums who are participating in wildland fire management across the nation and so forth. So it was a real nice piece, had several different, alums from multiple generations and stuff like that. And it's really become kind of a neat thing that we're doing over there. A partnership that through my affiliation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that we've been managing to grow, especially over the last 5 years. It's really kind of taken off. And we are seeing a lot of ISU alums, a lot of students getting out, getting a foothold with state and federal governments, with non-government organizations and stuff across the country, in all sorts of different emergency management stuff. It's really become pretty neat. It's kind of, it's really, I'm proud of it actually, to see how many kids are getting out. It shouldn't call them kids, young adults, young professionals, right? And getting them out in the world and so forth. So kind of my real quick background and my introduction to fire, and how I kind of got into the fire world, was like a lot of Iowa State students, right? We knew about prescribed fire. We talk about it in management in our classes and stuff like that. Got in a few of them, through internships and stuff like that. I did my basic coursework way back in 2001. But then when I came back to Iowa State, there in my bio and so forth, I left for a couple of years as a private lands specialist and so forth. And then went out, came back to Iowa State to work on a grad degree, finished that, and then was hired on at the time by Dr. David Engel, who was the chair of NREM for a while. And our involvement, I did a lot with fire and grazing all over the Midwest, over the Great Plains, and really got involved because we had a lot of federal funding through things like Joint Fire Sciences Program and different U.S. state force, really kind of look at how grazing and fire and those things kind of interact. And so it really pushed me kind of into the realm of fire science, and then just fire management, how the whole system works. So that was kind of how I got involved in it just a little bit. And it's kind of a unique opportunity for someone from Iowa because it's tough to get into in our part of the world. And when I teach students and when I lecture and I go around, I was just doing a big talk for a group of folks in Illinois the other week. We don't understand, and maybe some of you have lived out in the Western United States or in the Southern United States or have visited there at different times of the year, but just how prevalent fire is in their culture. I mean, it's sometimes it's ever present. You're living in smoke, like in Oregon and stuff like that. In California, you might be living in smoke for months of the year. So it's kind of interesting to see how things work in a different part of the world. It's hard for Iowans and Midwestern folks to kind of get into that. But as I kind of grew at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, a lot of mentors gave me the chance to get into the science and really and kind of get more experience in that sort of stuff. And it's something we don't realize, right? That every day, emergency response across the nation really takes many tens and hundreds of thousands of people to manage incidents. And, these firefighters, these folks that we train up, they're involved not just in wildfires, but in floods and hurricanes. There's a lot of folks deployed to Hurricane Ian recovery right now, to oil spills all over the place. The Shuttle Columbia crash in 2003 was a big thing that lots of Forest Service and other agency people were a part of. Everything from 9/11 to earthquakes and all sorts of stuff. People get deployed all over the nation in this stuff. And it's really just the events that we see on the news that are kind of the newsmakers, right? They're just that. And no one really realizes that there's hundreds and hundreds of incidents daily, even just if we're talking about wildfires. And I happened to be deployed to Texas this summer for a couple of weeks. I mean, in this screenshot here is just one afternoon in Texas, right? This is one afternoon of all the fires that were ripping in Texas that day. And I happened to be the fire manager. I happened to be the officer in charge of that very northern fire up there towards Amarillo that afternoon and stuff. But every one of these things has 30 to 40 people working it. And so there's this big need for emergency response personnel across the nation. And so there's a need to train those people to a certain standard so that they can all work together. And all that training and all that sort of world is all managed by a group called the National Wildfire Coordinating Group, which is a big federally managed system for organizing, organizing and management of incidents, right? And it subscribes to this NIMS, this National Incident Management System, which is run by FEMA. The system dates back to the early 1990s, but really became mainstream in kind of that post 9/11 world. And then in 2003, Congress enacted the National Fire Plan, which was the offspring of several different events out west, some incidents that went wrong, and a lot of unfortunately fatalities and a lot of property loss and stuff kind of spurred this National Fire Plan. And all the federal agencies and 30 or so states, and then there's a lot of private entities and other organizations, fire departments and stuff like that, have the option to basically adopt the NWCG system. And through that hierarchy, they kind of establish, qualifications and command, and these things are all understood amongst all these different organizations. Federal, state agencies, NGOs, the National Guard, Coast Guard, both work under these systems too. I've actually been on fires where I worked under National Guard and where I actually had National Guard folks working for me, even though I am not military and stuff. So it's really a pretty clear-cut system for trying to manage these things. It really focuses on trying to get a span of control, kind of a flexible, expandable, contractible system to handle these natural disasters and stuff like that, where every person on that incident actually has a defined set of qualifications of what they're qualified to do. And it's all run out of Boise, Idaho. The whole system is basically run from Boise, Idaho. It's all affiliated entities do use the ICS, the Incident Command System, and it's kind of set up through FEMA and NIMS and so forth, this National Incident Management System. And all training is defined by something called the Red Book. So when we teach these courses and we educate Iowa State students, and this is separate from their university education, we have to follow this basic training that's all set forth by this federal guide called the Red Book. That's this training standard that all emergency responders have to meet. And every person then who's qualified in that will have different jobs that they're capable of performing. So we try to get ISU students and personnel and stuff like that this basic training so that they can get into that world and kind of advance down their career paths. So some of the professional positions, and you'll see this in a little bit, like paramedics, attorneys, biologists, all sorts of those sorts of things. NWCG recognizes their outside training credentials and so forth, and allows them to practice kind of within their scope, whether you're in law, medicine, engineering, and so forth. They allow you to practice within your scope of your licensure. So when we train a student, or when we come out into that world, everybody, and this is a really complex flow chart, and there's a lot going on here, but everybody starts down here at this basic FFT2 level, that bottom level orange box right there on the bottom. We all start out as a basic firefighter 2, and then we can kind of work our way up to being a more advanced firefighter, and we can slide over here to these blue boxes, which are the incident command boxes. We can actually be an incident commander on some stuff, and take charge of incidents and actually order new people or different resources and stuff. Then you can advance to being an engine boss, crew boss, firing boss. That's an SRB box, right? That's that single resource box. So as you move up through the system, you have to take different coursework. They apply in different ways in kind of your career and stuff like that, and so forth. Back, say, 20 years ago, Iowa kind of just a little bit culturally, especially, really chose not to pursue that NWCG qualification path as a state. So we are one of the 20-some states that don't adopt. And there's a lot that fed into that, right? Part of it's cultural, because we don't have that sort of fire in the culture that a lot of places in the nation do. You can go just west of us into Kansas and stuff like that. Fire is very much in the ranching culture. It's very much in the rural culture and stuff like that. So it's understood. Part of that was practical, right? We in Iowa don't have a lot of fire management that we have to do. We don't have raging wildfires every other day. The VFDs handle those things in Iowa, volunteer fire departments and so forth. It's very expensive to kind of get on that, to get your people trained for that sort of stuff. And there's also lack of instructional capacity. So there's not a lot of, it actually takes a certain level person to actually be able to teach the courses and things like that in the state. And so students or agency personnel who really wanted that kind of training or qualification really had to work hard to find it. And so we'd see university students who'd maybe get an inkling of it, but they'd have to go out of state to find that training and spend a week or two out of state, stay in hotels. So it's kind of an obstacle or a barrier to getting people in Iowa kind of trained to those levels. So, but at the same time, we started seeing when I was at Iowa State there for a while that lots of federal resource agencies in those 10 years of that post-2001 era, and many NGO entities, a lot of different places started requiring that baseline training for all their employees. And so we started seeing that Iowa State's, our interim graduates coming out of natural resources in Iowa State sometimes found themselves competing pretty well, but missing that one extra notch in their belt a little bit too. So it's kind of setting us, not necessarily at a disadvantage, but, we just weren't quite on par with where maybe kids coming out of or students coming out of other universities were. So it's hard to get it was hard at the time to get federal agencies to really kind of want to facilitate that instruction. So it's kind of difficult to gain traction. And so about 2008, Dr. Jesse Randall and I, who at the time was the ISU Extension Forestry professor, saw an opportunity to try and get some of this training for students. And we brought a consultant in to get us started. And so we did that for a couple of years and it worked okay. And then I left Iowa State after 2012, and Dr. Randall went to Michigan State after about 2013. And so kind of took a pause for a couple of years, but then we kind of resumed it. And we've done it 5 or 6 years in a row now, where we put this S130-190 training, we call it, on for Iowa State students. And we've started to expand. We're trying to get Upper Iowa University students, community college students, and a few agency folks every year, but we're having 25 to 30 students a year now since 2018. And so every fall at Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge, it's just on the outskirts of Des Moines, just the east of Des Moines. If you've never been there, it's a gorgeous place. With the bison and the elk herds and stuff like that. But we offer this course out there every fall. And there's a lot of coursework that goes into it. You have to take about 30 or 40 hours of online course to begin with. And so they complete that online coursework at their own pace the fall. Dr. Eisenhardt at Iowa State does a fantastic job of facilitating that for the students. He keeps track of it. Some of them actually take it as part of a course that they're taking in their undergraduate education. Like that. So a lot of them, the forestry fall camp course actually goes out for a month to different parts of the country, and then they come back in that intervening month and they kind of take this the online portion of this training, and then we wrap that whole thing up then with the field day out at Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge. And so that basic training that all those folks have to take includes this S130, which is the firefighter training. So that's just equipment, tools, tactics, how to stay safe in a fire environment, and all sorts of things. S190, which is how wildfire behaves, which is a completely different world than structural fires. So structural fire departments and wildland fire departments are completely different worlds. You have lots of chemicals, lots of different things that are released in enclosed environments in a structural fire world, but your fire stays put. Whereas like in a wildfire, that fire is up and running, it's moving. Last year there was a fire in Oregon that came off a mountain. They clocked it at 45 miles an hour. I mean, it was outrunning cars down the side of the mountain. So it's a whole different world, right? The weather, the environmental conditions influence that a lot. That's what that S190 course teaches. Human factors course, just about how fatigue, how physiologically people respond, psychologically people respond to fire and stressors. And then the two things for incident command, okay? And students are really working towards what they call a red card, which is your credential with the government or with an agency. And so you have to take that series of courses. And so we provide them the first step and then help them get sponsored by an agency. They have to then complete some sort of physical fitness test, called a work capacity test. And sometimes they have to pass physicals. Not all agencies require physicals, but some do. So they'll start here. There's a big online system that the federal government runs. They'll take these courses, and it takes about 30 to 40 hours of online work, of working through different sorts of exercises and PowerPoints and stuff like that. But then the real fun of it comes when we get them out, and we take them out for 2 days out at Neil Smith. It's almost always on the weekend because it's outside of their normal curriculum hours and stuff like that. But we really try and roll everything they've learned online into practice, right? And you can find these courses in different places, the field courses in different places. But one of our goals is not just to make sure, yep, they've had it, kick them out into the world, but we really want to prepare them for the rigors of what it's going to take, the stressors that they're going to face, how they relate to different agencies and how they can use it to help themselves kind of look for employment and so forth. So we'll walk them through all the basics to try and give them a really good test, right? We'll work them through fire shelter deployment. Fire shelters are a thing that we all have to carry when we're out on wildland fire. They're kind of your line of last defense or your thing of last resort. If you're being overcome by a fire, we have these specialty shelters that help us that are supposed to help firefighters survive a fire entrapment. We try and get them familiarized with engines, working around wildfire engines. They're a little bit different than structural fire engines, and so forth. So we get them used to working around some of that equipment, how some of the basics of those things work. Everything that they'll have to use in the field, being able to recover a hose off the side of a hillside quickly and deploy it and so forth. To gritting the timber, going out, working in the woods and adverse conditions and stuff. Students out there and do some of that. Teach them to do some of the basics, learning belt weather, how to take weather readings, how to report this back into some of the climatologists, meteorologists that are working on some of these big fires and stuff like that. Teach them how to build hand line. That's a big part out in a lot of the world about how we fight fire. We dig line in, we use bulldozers and shovels and everything else to dig lines, kind of get them hands on. You're going to get work blisters. Basics of that. So we've been doing this for a few years, and then Malia Licht up at the Visions magazine kind of got hold of this and part of the special issue that they're doing, and kind of came together with this. Really wanted to do a little bit of the feature on this and where some of our students go and how we train them up. So I have a little video snippet here, and I don't know if some folks have seen this. It might take just a second to kind of load up. I hope it plays through here. They did. And I don't know if folks have actually seen this. It's just kind of a neat little synopsis. I'm going to play it here of just what we've done at Iowa State and what we put the students through every fall. This will get up on here. Let's see if it slows. So it's become really, really kind of a neat thing, in that we're getting a lot of positive feedback because we work really hard to make sure that our students do get that hands-on thing, that training, and that hands-on experience, and we're trying to really get them involved, get them out of the classroom, get them seeing what it's like and stuff like that, and kind of introducing them to some of those concepts, the things we have to deal with out in the field, just to give them a taste, because it's not an easy work. It's not easy work, and it's different sorts of stressors. You're deployed, you're away from home for weeks at a time, from loved ones and friends and so forth. So we try and really give them a taste of what they're going to get into when they do it. So, but an additional goal for us too is that because we're working with university students, we're in a little bit different kind of demographic. Our goal is really to expose students to all the different opportunities there are in the fire world. Because literally anything or any profession that you could find yourself doing, from medical to GIS to engineering to meteorology to logistics, transportation, those things, is all necessarily in the fire world. And really that basic series of courses that we teach, the 130, the 190, 180, is just kind of the beginning, right? There's over 100 different NWCG and FEMA courses in the curriculum, in the federal curriculum they can get into and stuff once they get into their career path. Everything from dispatch to medical to incident command to meals or food services and stuff like that. It's really pretty diverse. So I mean, if you just look at a real basic org chart of what a big Western fire might look like, I mean, if you can't read these little boxes and so forth, this gives you a sense that every one of those boxes and every one of the little kind of scratch positions inside it has that many different positions on a fire. I mean, from finance administration, so auditors, finance people, and so forth, to the planning people who it's sort of the engineering folks, and those folks land and so forth. It's really pretty diverse, and so we really stress that just because you're not on the line swinging a shovel or running a chainsaw, there's all sorts of different opportunities for you in the wildfire world and so forth. But the partnerships become super successful. We have students out all over the country now, students, former students, people out on internships for the summer, really just kind of everywhere. And people have found footholds, young men and women who found footholds all over the country in this sort of stuff. And state agencies, federal agencies, we have a lot of people working for NGOs like the Nature Conservancy and stuff like that all over the nation. So become pretty successful, and I'm really I'm glad to have the opportunity to share it and stuff like that. We're really kind of proud of what we're doing. So that's about 20 minutes or so of me talking and so forth. But I'm happy to take questions on what we do and stuff like that, if there's any out there and so forth. So I'll stop my sharing quick. And just kind of open it up if anybody's got questions or chats or anything like that. So I see there's a couple in the chat box. Oops, sorry. So yeah, I'll open it up.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So how long can you survive in one of those fire shelters that you were describing, or the picture you showed?
Sure. So, I mean, those are just practice shelters that you saw in that picture. And, those are just for training people that are training firefighters to get them and stuff like that. There's no real set time on survivability in them. They're really meant to, the ultimate goal of the fire shelter is to protect yourself or protect your airway. If you are overcome by a wildfire and stuff like that, you are going to suffer burns. I mean, there is no way around that. Even with all your protective clothing and protective gear, you're going to suffer burns. But typically, most fatalities and most things like that occur because of actually inhaling superheated gases. And so the goal of the fire shelter is to kind of create a little bubble, and it's just a little bubble, and they're actually they're what are they? They're aluminum foil with silica. There's a silica layer in the middle of them. They're kind of a sandwich material of aluminum foil, silica, and another layer of aluminum foil to reflect radiant heat and so forth. And it tries to keep you basically so that you'll be in a 400 to 500 degree oven rather than a 3,000 degree oven. It's just to protect your airway, basically. So there are stories of people surviving entrapments for 20 to 25 minutes. Most entrapments, I think they measure in terms of 8 to 10 minutes and stuff like that. So, but we have question in the chat. Are there enough trained people to staff the large Western wildfires that have been prevalent in the last 4 to 5 years? That's a great question, and the answer is no. Frankly, there's not. And this year, 2022, is actually a pretty mild year compared to the last several years. And I say mild, and we still had at one point 24,000 firefighters deployed across the nation. But there is typically competition amongst fires and amongst resources, but they're trying to order as many people as they can, and they can't fulfill all the positions. And there are cases where fires go on longer than they should, and we unfortunately lose residences and houses and businesses because there aren't enough people to get out in front of them and stuff like that. There are staffing shortages, and so there is a need for folks out there. So yes. Question.
You had shown a screen about a hard or a hand line. What can you describe that? What that is?
Sure. Yeah, you bet. So a hand line is just something that we use to try and control wildfire, right? So in order to put a fire out, they talk in fire science, we talk about the fire triangle. And so you have oxygen, heat, and fuel. And to put a fire out, if you're in a structural fire or if you're in a wildfire, either situation, you have to break that triangle, right? It's a real basic engineering triangle. And so what we're doing is just trying to separate fuels, right? And in some places we can do that by bringing a fire engine in and hosing it down, basically making everything wet so it won't burn and we separate fuels. Or we can bring in a bulldozer or a tractor or what have you and try and kind of actually plow down to the dirt, separate fuels from each other. But in a lot of places in the West, especially, we can't get equipment in on mountainsides and on things like that where people build homes. We can't get heavy equipment in to do those sorts of things. So we actually have to build the line by hand. And so they deploy crews of 20 firefighters at a time. And everybody has a variety of different tools. We organize ourselves into a certain kind of array of tools. And you basically just hand chop a line through the dirt, through the brush, anywhere from 3 to 6 foot wide to try and break them. You may have heard the term hotshot crews in the news and stuff like that. Hotshot crews can build about a 1/4 mile of line per hour. So they can build a line that's 6 foot wide, chainsawed, cleared, and shoveled down to the bare dirt. And they can build a 1/4 mile per hour. And so they're rated at how fast they can build line and stuff like that. And so it's really, really interesting to see how many, to see how that happens and stuff. There are places where that is the main control strategy, where we're just trying to create a line. Very often they'll come in behind it with a torch and we'll actually try and burn away from that line then, where we're right there to kind of control that fire and try and use that fire then to fight fire with fire. Because once we build the line, burn away from it, there's nothing left to burn, and we can kind of create protection around structure and stuff like that. So, all right, another one. Let's see. We keep track of individuals that have gone through our program. It's a great question. We do our best. Dr. Eisenhart and I do our best. It's amazing when young students get out in the world and stuff like that, how quickly they disappear into the ether. We do our best to stay connected with them. I know we've put somewhere around 250 students over the last 8 or 10 years through the training. And I know we have had between 50 and 60 utilize that training directly in gaining employment and stuff like that. And then a lot of them use it kind of, in an ancillary capacity where they got a job somewhere else, but they have the training so they can be, employed in that too, or they can be utilized in that role. So we probably have a good 25 that we have followed. I know I had about 16 this last summer out of our last 2 classes who were all over the West and working for like National Park Service and working for the Nature Conservancy and working for the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. So working in all those different agencies. It's fun to try and track them, but it gets difficult for a while. So another question, does state fire training available to our rural fire departments provide any training in wildfire management? And the answer to that is no. In Iowa, we do not. And so our VFDs, our fire departments in Iowa, basically, so the State Fire Marshal's Office and the State Fire Training Bureau do not train in wildfire in Iowa. They train in structural fire only. The federal government at times will offer what's called a crosswalk, which is basically a means of training structural fires in combating wildfire and using different tactics and using their equipment differently. And it's kind of hit and miss how well that's received from year to year, but it is not part of a standard training program it's offered by the State Fire Service Training Bureau. So no. Good question.
Ryan, is there, you talk about meteorology or some of the other science that goes into maybe, I don't know if there's much predictability in the environmental conditions that might move a wildfire here or there. Can you talk about a little bit more about that, and then how you use that to maybe stage resources to stay out ahead of it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Mason. It's really, there is a ton of modeling software out there. There's constantly more modeling software being developed. And the fire world uses some pretty high level advanced stuff from both NOAA, from NASA, all sorts of different things like that, as well as some very there's a software package called Behave, which is a pretty big thing developed by Montana State and then the Missoula Fire Labs up in Montana, which is a big federal fire science center, stuff like that. Big software package that predicts how fire will move in all sorts of different environments around the nation and around the continent, actually. It's really pretty interesting. It's pretty complex at times, but yeah, so some of these big teams, when they're managing a big wildfire, I mean, they will predict the weather 3, 4, 5 days out to 2 weeks out, and then be trying to predict those influences and where fire will move. Of course, it's very, very dynamic, because not only do you have the weather, but you have topography and landscapes and stuff like that that are driving things as well. You get different sorts of airflows, not just weather, but based on heating and cooling throughout the day, you get all sorts of things like inversion layers, and sometimes you get downslope winds and stuff like that that are just caused by uneven heating and cooling of the earth. And so they do their best to try and predict that for days and weeks in front of some of these big fires. And we do stage resources out ahead of things. We try and prep things 3 or 4 days in advance sometimes when they predict that fire is going to get there. It's a hard concept for Iowans to kind of get our heads around, but a 350,000 acre fire, which is the size of Story County, is not unusual anymore. I mean, that's just an average size fire sometimes out west that might have 5,000 firefighters working on it, and that fire will just chug for weeks. And so it's there's quite a science behind trying to get people in places and resources out in front of that, and to try and head things off from houses and structures and towns and stuff like that ahead of time. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of people that are what we call the base who are just living in. Sometimes they bring in big tent cities and stuff like that, and they use huge mobile command networks and stuff just to try and kind of be the IT support behind all that, just to try and support all that need. So yeah, it's really interesting.
How's the communication in some of those remote areas? Like from a telecommunication standpoint, et cetera?
It is anywhere from fantastic to extremely sketchy to non-existent. We're actually going through that, Iowa. We're kind of in the process of updating our communication systems right now. The West still relies largely on repeater systems, and sometimes they're very complicated repeater systems. I've been on a fire in Colorado where we had 4 different repeater networks, and as we went from fire to fire, we had to switch our radios all the time to different repeater networks. And so when you're trying to talk to one engine that's on a different fire, you're switching zones and repeater networks and stuff like that, and it can be challenging. It can be very, very challenging. For that, we try on some of those bigger things. We try to use a command network and then a local network. So like locally, if we're just working here in this kind of 100-acre area, and I've got 30 firefighters working, we're on a very local kind of point-to-point network, then we may have then someone who's bouncing off a command network that's a separate kind of channel and stuff like that. So we do get in places where sometimes I have been places where firefighters are better off trying to communicate via cell phone, although that's not reliable at all either in different places in the West, because you have different cell phone networks and carriers and stuff that make things challenging. So it can be very challenging communication wise on some of those things. So they do their best. Some of the big organizations have communication specialists. They'll bring in radio specialists from like Motorola or Bendix King or Collins and stuff like that, whose sole job is just to be the communications engineer, just trying to manage some of that stuff. So Got a few more questions up here in the chat. So, your most intense situation or experience? Actually, this summer I had one that I was ordered down to Texas by the federal government as what's called an ICT-4, so a Type 4 incident commander, and two of the other teams, the team out of Lubbock and the team out of Amarillo, were committed. And so I got called up with my team out of Childress, Texas. My team had people from North Carolina, Florida, Arizona, Colorado, Texas, and Tennessee on it. And we got called into a situation, and that fire took off on us a lot faster than we thought it would. The volunteer fire department had been trying to hold it in the river bottom, and it hit the mesa top, and it jumped onto that mesa, and it took off and ran, and we had it reverse on us because of a thunder cell, and I had to order aircraft, and it got really, really sketchy, really, really stressful for about 2 hours before we kind of got around the head of it and stuff. I had a situation where one of my bulldozers was almost run over by the fire, and stuff like that. So most rewarding, it is rewarding. There's certainly a sense of service. When we're out, it's very often we get, I very much treat it as just it's my chance to give back and my chance to go lend a hand to communities and stuff like that. We have people come up and thank us all the time and try and bring us lunch and those sorts of things, which is always appreciated. But for me, I'm just there because I have the ability to help and the training to help, and it's kind of neat to go out and do some of those things. Is there any hope for widespread fuel reduction in the Western forests? That's a really challenging question. Because there's so much out there, and we're dealing with over a century of fire suppression, where we were so worried out west of fire getting into and destroying our timber resources. There's a lot of reasons behind that, this forum and stuff like that. But now we're so far behind the 8 ball in some of that, it is difficult to get in and do large scale thinnings and so forth. A lot of it is done on a very targeted basis to try and get around large communities, population centers, critical resource areas, and stuff, where they are making a lot more progress with some of the thinning actions to try and actually make some of that more manageable. So, next question: Are there public health issues from downwind smoke being dangerously toxic? So, the things we are most concerned about with smoke, there's 6 EPA contaminants that we're worried about in smoke, but really in wildfire smoke, there's 2 of them that we're most worried about. And the most damaging is PM 2.5. So 2.5 micron particulate matter, because that's the stuff that gets through your nose, gets through past your lung system, down into your bronchial tubes, and gets into the alveoli. It's actually a particulate matter that's too small. And so there is, certainly for people in sensitive populations, anything with a managed ventilation system and stuff like that, hospitals, nursing homes, schools, daycare centers, that stuff is very, very dangerous. And we do worry about it, people with respiratory ailments and stuff like that. There's not a lot we can do as firefighters. We're out there working to kind of protect ourselves from it. Sometimes you're just in it, right? And it has shown to have a lot of long-term health effects on firefighters that we do worry about a little bit. And so there can be some of those issues. Depending on what's burning, some of that can be more toxic than other things. If like say here in Iowa, if we burn through a patch of poison ivy, sometimes the stuff in poison ivy can actually volatilize and actually impact your airways a little bit. So if you're really sensitive to things like poison ivy, sometimes poison ivy smoke, even if you're not anywhere near the plant, can actually cause problems for you. So yeah, some of those things come into play. So does funding for fighting the large wildfires flow through FEMA and the federal government, or a combination of state and federal? It's really a combination of state and federal, and that's a great question. Ultimately, almost all wildfire funding flows from the Forest Service, and not necessarily FEMA directly, but to all other federal agencies, it starts at the Forest Service. But it depends on where the fire originates. And so if it's a state or private, if it originates on private ground or on state land, the state will usually foot the bill, in the big Western states especially. If it starts on federal land, it'll be the federal government that kind of foot the bill. But and so wherever it originates, then there's cost sharing agreements amongst the agencies to reimburse and so forth. So are there permanent firefighter teams in service, and how much are they paid? So that's been a big debate. There are certainly firefighters. There are kind of the overhead, what we would call the administration of the overhead. and are typically full-time folks. The firefighter, the true boots on the ground sort of thing, they are more like 9-month employees. They're not necessarily permanent. There are some year-round employees out there. There's actually a bunch of legislation that just went through Congress and passed this spring about the Firefighter Payroll Act and stuff like that to actually up what firefighters are paid. Because say a year ago, you would have gotten started in the world and you would have been paid about $11.50 an hour starting. So $11.50 or $12 an hour to go out there in some of these very, very challenging environments and working 18-hour shifts for 6 to 8 weeks at a time and stuff like that. It was challenging, but there's been some upgrades to that and so forth. But I've had students go out and do very, very well, north of $60,000 or $70,000 in a 6-month period because of all the overtime they work and stuff like that. So it can be fortuitous, but it's long, hard, grueling work and challenging hot environments and stuff like that. So thoughts regarding natural burns to occur. And so the Forest Service does in places where they determine that the fire can't have any adverse impacts on what society would consider an adverse impact. It's just out there. It's not going to affect any farms or homes or ranches. We can close down some trails to people who want to go hiking and stuff like that. They will let things burn. But they had a situation this last year. If you heard in the news, there's a fire called Calf Canyon Hermit's Peak. And that got away from a little bit. And so it's going to change a lot of federal policy in the years to come. There's already a book that's about 1.5 inches thick come down of new policy stuff and findings from that in the spring. So there's a lot of impetus behind it to let things burn more naturally and try and restore that because it does thin the forests out a little bit and prevents future wildfire. But it's pretty politically fraught in a lot of areas. Because there's a lot of tension between like industry and private citizens. There are industries who do not want the forest to burn because they have a logging contract on it for 10 years. So they don't want any fire. And there's places that do want it to burn because they don't want the fire to, they want low key fire and stuff like that. So it's pretty policy fraught. So I visited Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge Prairie multiple times. I've never noticed whether they do burns. We do actually. We've done a lot out there. In the last few years, the way the Fish and Wildlife Service has spread some of their resources around it, they've had to stretch things out to reallocate resources. So they haven't done a lot of fire in the last 2 to 3 years, but they do. Neil Smith is about 6,000 acres on total, and they would certainly like to burn 1,000 to 2,000 acres a year. They would like to do one more yet this fall and try and get some fire out there this fall yet. And we have plans to maybe do another 1,000 acres next spring. So we do. Yep, they try to keep it very healthy out there. So, all right. Mason says one more question.
Yep, just offering it up. There's time for one more question. Throw it in the chat. All right, not seeing any takers, Ryan. Thank you.
It's okay. There's a lot of great questions, a lot of good discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the valuable insight today. It was great and informative presentation. Thank you. So, Kent, we'll throw it back over to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, Ryan, that was an awesome presentation. I found this quote that ties in with what you had to share. A good firefighter knows how. An educated firefighter knows why. That's from Chris Walker. Next week, again, we'll have Dan Culhane online. And with that, let's go ahead and go to the 4-way test. And Karen, can you pull up the 4-way test slide for everyone?
I
don't know if I can be heard.
Okay, can you see it now?
I think I remember it.
Yeah.
Good for you. All righty. Thanks, folks. Appreciate that. The 4-way test of the things we think, say, or do. Is it the truth?
Is it the truth?
Is it fair to
all concerned? Will it build goodwill
and better friendships? Will it be beneficial
to all
concerned? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for your participation. It's much appreciated. And again, Ryan, for your words of wisdom. And that, we'll say a fond farewell for everyone. There will be a board meeting in about 6 or 7 minutes.
Thank you.